All right, it's Friday, August 8th, about 7:40. 83 outside's heating up over the weekend. Looks like we might get a break some part in the early part of next week with a little bit of showers. And I thought, should we even talk about applying for disease ever again? Let's take a look. Rolling out some Appleton North Niagara. Survey says no, not really. This week is not going to be a lot of rain. You may get that break with the forecast, but it's not going to generate a substantial amount of rain. I think you're good. What does the fly spec city watch model say? Let's see. Let's just assume, example, you sprayed on the 18th of July. At this point, it's saying you probably should do something. However, if we pick a more reasonable day, let's say you did something on the 25th, we're moving into a cautious zone for the Niagara area, but it's not so intense. And we'll talk about the materials to spray. I think it's going to be another light week of biopesticides and other types of things. And you can do the Cap 10 phosphorus acid combo if you want, but let's don't use up any more single site fungicides. Take advantage of this drought. I don't think we're going to need them. Let's move into the middle of the state and we'll look up. Go into the middle of Western New York, I'll say. Yep, same sort of thing. If you sprayed on the 25th, yeah, you're fine. Not a lot of rain since the last application, a tenth of an inch of rain. We're entering into a drought. Sure, if you haven't sprayed since the 18th, it might be worthwhile putting something on, but you might as well wait until we see something. It looks like for the Western New York, not in the Niagara region, but regular Western New York, the Sodus region and stuff like that up along the lake, you might have a 40% chance on the 13th. That might be our break in the heat. And if you hadn't sprayed in forever, I'd wait until like the 11th or the 12th before even dealing with it. What does the apple scab model say? Anything at all? It's not really even seeing much. It shows a percentage. It's probably going to be a thunderstorm. Nothing to sweat about. Let's go into the middle of the state, the old Interlaken area. It says we're coming off an infection period last week during the rain. Yeah, probably. But nope, super easy. If you had to put something on, wait till the end of the week. And let's see what the Interlaken model looks like there. I'm going to move it back up to I sprayed on the 25th, or at least probably more likely. The last time we put an application on was more like the 20th. And now it's suggesting that one should do something. And we're planning on going out early next week and putting on a cover. We have some trials, which we have intervals that are sort of calendar for summer disease. I mean, do we really need it? Probably not. There's not a lot of rain coming. It's just been a long time. And so, since our last one on the 21st, yeah, it's about time to go again. Still doing my UV weekly. Trees look great, and particularly in this weather. It was a heavy early season, a lot of rain, but now it's looking pretty good. Let's move on down to Voorheesville, see how we're doing. Let's see how they're doing. Same thing. If we keep that 21 date, it's saying, hey, be careful. And if you haven't sprayed in a long time, you sprayed more like the 25th, you're fine. If it's more like the 20th of July, yeah, you could put something on. We'll talk about what that is. Let's see if anything shows up on the scab model for Voorheesville. The scab model is great because it talks a lot more about leaf wetness and weather data. And all of these fungi love leaf wetness and weather data. They all tend to like slightly cooler temperatures, except for the bitter rots and those types of things. Looking pretty good. Otherwise, that Voorheesville is sort of clean as a whistle, too. We get an increase in the percentage of rain. It might be a thunderstorm. Watch out for hail, all that other stuff as well. Let's go up and see Chazy. See how they're doing. I'll be headed up that way this week on the 13th. So, who knows? Maybe they'll get a little bit maybe it will be that evening. Well, it sounds like it'll be that day where we get the thunderstorm, but nothing. It's clean. No need. I bet they're all probably very similar. If you haven't put anything on since the 20th, maybe you'd think about putting on a little bit of protective cover. You're getting pretty close to the end of harvest. Moving down the state, let's see how the Hudson Valley Campbell Hall is doing. Oh, if they haven't put something on the 20, I had that big 2 inches of rain. Of course, they're going to put something on. Let's just pretend that they did put something on the 25th. Wow. It's still showing some dark days. If you hadn't put anything, what about the 1st? All right, if you put something on closer to the 1st, or maybe the 28th, you're still in the red zone. There's not a lot of rain coming. If you're protected against that last big 2 inches of rain, you're fine. I'm going to bring up Campbell Hall here. and see what it looks like. Yeah, pretty clear. It's a lot of leaf wetness hours, but I'm guessing humidity or dew in the morning. Enough to not really cause too much trouble unless you had a lot of carryover. I suspect everything's burnt out except for bitter rot. Some of those warmer season diseases, but I wouldn't even really worry about apple blotch or marcenine at this particular juncture. It's time to think about another one. Yeah, watch that percentage of rain as we get later in the week, and you can think about it. But I don't think it's cause for graciously a lot of alarm. Riverhead. Let's see how they're doing. Often very different. It's 28th. Fine. Let's go back to that 21st if you were playing on our. Yeah, if it's 21st, more likely Hudson Valley. They got a big rain event. They've come through it. Haven't put on in a while. You're in trouble. But I suspect if you did something closer to the 28th, you're in the green. It's not been enough rain to really wash that residue off. But you could be approaching soon. Watch the weather, the forecast percentages. Once we get a break in the heat with the next rain, things might be worth covering for. And with that, let's go ahead and pop on over. I'm going to close this window. Let's pop into this thing here. Our season, and we'll see how things look. We're at the very end. We're heading to that 6th to 8th cover, the last few. And, the 8th or 9th cover, depending on your variety, might be your last application. We'll talk a little bit about finishing strong towards the end as well. We'll talk about what to spray now, and then doing some, end of season cleanup as one of the last videos we'll be talking about. The two sort of rotate. This is sort of your theoretical plan if you didn't have Cap 10 Mancozeb. And right now, with this drought, we're in a perfect opportunity to save your single site fungicide, save your 7s, 11s, 3s, and 52s, Miravis, Stevia, Axios. See when their PHI is and strategically plan to make one of those your last application. And we'll talk about that briefly. Right now, we have less than 5 inches, 5 days, and 1.5 inches of rain. Keep on the low rate of Cap 10 if you have any. You can put phos acid in there to boost it, but you just really don't need much at this particular juncture. Now's your time to try the biopesticides. I'm a big fan of the liquid ones. Oso's a nice one. I sprayed Oso today and Double Nickel and a couple of the others. Trees look good. Maybe I'll get out there with a real camera and show you some of what things look like if you don't use Cap 10 and Mancozeb. They look fine this year despite the heavy rain that we had early on. Howler is nice powder. Use some Howler tonight as well. On some apples. Yep, moving into it. If you're organic, you could probably do 14 to 21. You're organic, you might need to be a little bit tighter because, particularly if you're in a low-lying area where humidity can build or if your canopy's really thick, definitely stick to these. And, if it's pretty intense, you could go with the Oso and the Howler. The Pseudomonas chlorophysis is becoming a more popular type of bacteria to use in the biopesticide and produces some pretty strong antimicrobial metabolites. But right now, I think you'll be cooking really well with Stargis, EcoSwing, all the liquid ones. Even the powders are fine. It's just that these are so much easy to mix. They're just sort of like a pleasure to spray, if you will. Even Howler is a powder is pretty nice to put in the tank. Don't see any residue in the bottom. Goes in, comes out, all nice and clean. So with that, let's talk about fire blight. There's still a little bit left. And we'll talk about what to do if you're getting towards the end of the season and you have time or have to remove some stuff like that. If you're at the end of the season and there's still some fire blight in the trees, if you have it in the main scaffold, just remove and replant, particularly if you have any M9 type rootstocks. They're just not going to make it. Sometimes these are the ones here in this photo are all Geneva rootstocks, and they come back and they look like little bushes, and that's fine for my efficacy trials because I just need a big bush with a million shoots and a whole bunch of flowers to inoculate with fire blight. But in terms of trying to make these things look normal again, no amount of tree training and nutrition can ever make these things not look like a bush. Maybe I'll get out there and show you the bushes because that's what they're going to look like. They're just a bunch of dead stuff. It's just not worth your time. I've been able to replant and plant new orchards, and they look better, faster than these other things hanging on. 1 to 2 year old, actively growing high density trees, you just may not be able to salvage them with pruning and stuff like that. The bacteria goes fully systemic, particularly in this weather. If we had any rain in this heat, it'd go about 3 to 5 days. These bacteria will just ride through it like a water park ride. And then, of course, the other thing that you run into with some of the really older, bigger trees, Mike sent me some pictures, they just may not be productive. And in this case, you could keep them, but they may not be the best source of apples. And then the other thing is you're frustrated because you're constantly cutting things out and you're constantly spraying double nickel and clava and wondering why it won't do anything. Remember, at this point, fire blight is inside the tree, and the moment the tree starts growing again, you might see new shoots. So that's something to watch out for. If we do get rain in the fall and the trees might pick up a little bit before, if we have a still warm fall, they might grow again, and then there might be some more fire blight, and you'll be left with these decisions. The bad thing about it is they just serve as a source of inoculum. Endophytic inoculum just means it's inside the tree, in the fight, in the plant, if you will. And then if they flush again, they're just emerge, and then more fire blight. And then nothing you do will spray on the surface will help with this. And then even the apogee is probably not worth, or the kudos isn't worth your money. Or peroxidine calcium, it's not going to move so much. Just remove this type of tree, put a new one. You can see it's getting the other trees next by, and that's not good. The PGR defense inducer is just less effective on the really big trees. Do they work on the little ones? Yeah, but if it runs so fast and it kills the tree, just maybe not do it. If you get to the end of the season, do a little bit of cleanup if you can, if you have the time and the crew to reduce the spread. While you can still see the strikes in the fall, you can prune them out. You can see chop, chop, chop all of these. I'll show pictures of it in winter, and it's harder to see them because they're just all dark. You can prune out as many things as you can. And then if you're like, well, what if I don't have a lot of time, but I want to take out something that looks like this disaster? You just simply cut the trees at the crown and let them dry out on the wire. Now is a great time to do it because we got no rain forecast whatsoever. They won't push, so they won't ooze. No new fire blight will show up. These will just turn into crispy things, and then you can use them as firewood for a bonfire or something of that. And maybe smoke some bacon on them. And a little bit of that fire blight sweetness might impact the flavor of the meat in a positive manner. But yeah, you can just cut these down. This is what they do in Washington. You don't have a lot of time. Hopefully you're training to a 3-wire system. In my case, I can't cut these down because there's a silly metal conduit right through the middle. But if you're training to a 1 or 2-wire system like all our new stuff, you just go through with a chainsaw. You don't even have to be paying that much attention and just go, or one of those pole saws. That way you can just go right down the road, pop, 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 cut them, let them hang, dry on the wire. And then when that's all done, drop a little bit of Roundup on any runners, particularly if they're M9, because you don't want those things getting a little bit of water in the fall and then springing out new fire blight and getting the rest of the stuff as well. What do we know about strep resistance? It wasn't very challenging. We seemed to do pretty well at bloom. It was a little bit hot towards the end and sort of a hot post bloom, but for the most part, I got a lot of good fire blight in my trials. We had good weather for blossom blight infections, but growers were very successful. They were doing all the right things, spraying at the right times, following the models, rotating materials. And the only thing that's really interesting, if you do choose to use a biopesticide for fire blight over some of the, particularly the types of products we mentioned, like the Eco Swings and the double nickels and the Starguses and Howler and all those other types of things, is they allow for double dipping because those bacteria antimicrobial metabolites are a little more general and safe, and they'll get both scab and fire blight. So if we end up making an extra spray for fire blight using one of these biologicals, we found that you pick up a little bit of extra scab along the way. Or if you're doing a scab program and you just don't even have a fire blight program and you're using all the biologicals, you'll often notice that in my trials, they have less fire blight always. In terms of the survey, we got about 4 submissions. Always shoot blight. Everyone got the blossom blight under control. And about 10 to 15 isolates, 2 locations. 2 were strep resistant, other 2 were sensitive. I'm really not that worried about it. I think we've got all the right tools we need to beat the system. So yeah, strep resistant, whatever. Use all of these fancy biopesticides, get double scab control, and knock out the fire blight. We have a lot of really good materials now. And interestingly enough, you'll see in the winter fruit schools, some of them outperform strep. And we still have strep sensitive. And strep looked good early on, but there's a big strep-resistant population that could come blowing through our fields anytime during a storm and cause trouble. But we'll have a look at that later during the winter meetings. And as you move into the final bit of your last cover, as I mentioned before, as you're getting close to harvest, take a look at all the different pre-harvest products, the single sites that you'd like to use, the Maravons and Lunas and all of these other things. and see when their PHI is. And then you can strategically put one on right at the end. That's why we want to save them. Don't use them during the drought. That's just a waste of your time. Use them now. Like Maravon and Sevia have a 0-day PHI, which means you can get them out pretty close to harvest on a block. And Luna Sensation, Spire Super 14 days. Howler, you want to go on organic, drop that howler in there right at the end. Some of these really potent materials, I keep putting howler in there because one of the metabolites it makes is a very similar material to a single site fungicide. And so you can come in and finish strong as we get to the end with scab and all the other fun summer diseases that might be showing up. Put one of these things on close to the PHI. Whatever one you saved, 14-day one works pretty well. We've done some studies where we do it. And then my student Riley will be at the post-harvest meeting, and I think she'll be showing some of this data, how it impacts the development of Penicillium expansum in storage and some of the other types of things. And generally, we found that some of these materials, a lot of studies with Luna specifically, and showed that it actually put a little more red color on statistically than some of them just doing nothing or Captan. I have never tested all the others, but they do seem to keep down those rots in storage. It's pretty nice. And then, of course, as we start thinking about next year, how do we save single site fungicides for post bloom? What I'm thinking, we may not have Captan and Mancozeb. We might need to rely a little bit more on them early on. My thoughts are use copper early twice. Try to get that in there as quickly as you can. If you have the protectants, use them and to get green tip to bloom. And we'll just assume that Mancozeb will still be there. If you don't have copper, go Captan and use it as you kind of move into bloom. But if you need a single site in the early season, then I'll be recommending this next year. The APs, the Anilinopyrimidine, Scalar Vanguard aren't bad in this early season. We want to save all these other things for bloom and beyond because that's when they start picking up a lot of diseases, and use those APs and Dodine in those other 5 days. And, if you have to put a protectant with them, some say add a protectant, but if all the protectants have been removed by the EPA, your biopesticide will be your protectant. These things have enough punch to get through on their own. That biopesticide just gives you that extra little bit of resistance management that you probably don't even need. So when you're thinking about planning the early part of next year, copper, and then you stick with something like Captan or biologicals if it's easy, and if it gets hard, use these Anilinopyrimidines and your Dodine, and then that will allow you to keep your SDHIs, QOIs, and DMIs, all these other fancier products, into the late bloom season. So that's a little bit of end of summer advice as well. If you have a really bad scab situation, let's just say you decided to have Macintosh again and they're loaded with scab. Mine are loaded with scab. They got overwhelmed in the early part of the season. You might think, my Mac has fungicide resistance. Nope, it's just highly susceptible, and it has gotten apple scab like no one's business this year. Mine are just absolutely wrecked, my Jersey Macs. And then the pink ladies next to it look like almost 90% better, even though they had the same inoculum and same programs. It can be pretty intense. So if you have a really scabby block, you might want to double down on sanitation in the fall. The other thing that's nice about it is all those other canker diseases and summer diseases will survive on fruit rots and prunings and other garbage. And if you can either get rid of this one way or another, either by raking it with some kind of tool or implement, really avoid a lot of inoculum. And if you have a lot of scab, it might be worth double downing. Typically, you do it in the fall or the spring with the leaf shredding, raking to the middle, scalping the sod, and you can use urea, 40 pounds per 100, or dolomitic lime. This picture here is actual, they had this paddle-like tool in Brazil. Got videos of it. It would come through, and it would paddle all the garbage into the middle, as you can see, all these old fruit drops and stuff. And then it would come back, and then it would, chop them up as well. This was right before, I think, before their season, or it was in the summer. Yeah, it might be right before the season as they were going into the fall. They're on the opposite. They're the bottom part of the hemisphere, so their fall is our spring, or their spring is our fall. And so, yeah, they were getting ready to go in, and they were cleaning up some stuff, and this type of stuff can do worlds of good. It usually only need to do it one time or another, but if I think I had Mac, I'd almost do it twice. Once in the fall and the spring. If you don't know when to do it, see when you have the hardest ground. Right now, we don't know what the spring looked like. Last spring was really wet and muddy. This spring, we don't know. But right now, I know that ground is going to be hard be a good opportunity to go ahead and get some sanitation down. And then, of course, finally, as we go into the last bit of the spring, we can do that delayed dormant silver tip copper. Not a lot of phytotox. There's a lot of good copper products that are safe. Some of these liquid ones go on smoothly. They don't stay forever. They do their job. They stay long enough, and then they move on. And their MCE is either, I usually recommend a 28% MCE at this time, but whatever, 15 or so is good. They all adjust the amount that you put in the tank for how much metallic copper equivalent, which is what that stands for. All right, I think that's going to get you through the rest of the harvest season with diseases. Remember, save those single sites for that last spray. Look at the PHIs of your favorite products that you got left and strategically deploy one. All right, I'll probably do a couple other videos here and there if I give any talks or things like that, or I want to look at some trials. But other than that, I'll probably do one or two more before the fall and I start teaching, and then we'll pick back up again next spring or in the winter if I give talks at various schools that you weren't able to attend. All right, we'll see you soon.